Hello there, my friends. Welcome to Carpo's channel. Where do I start on this video? I've been thinking today a lot about this. Some things that bother me about society. And then I'll walk away and say, you know what? It's just not even worth the time to talk about because it's just the way the world is. So, let's start my recorder here. I have a voice recorder going. Sometimes I forget to start that too. What I'd like to talk about is quite a few things here regarding just the bullshit that we're all immersed in. The way that we're all lied to. Of course, I've covered all these different things about politics and, the idiots in society. I don't want to dwell too much on that. I just want to call out very specific issues that I have right now for what it's worth. But sometimes I feel like it's just not even worth it. We have so many morons out there. I feel like I'm surrounded by idiots. And when I say that, it makes me feel not arrogant, I would guess, but that would be perhaps a little maybe elitist or pious. I don't know the right terminology. But I believe that people are equal. And I believe that at least everyone should be treated equally until they've proven themselves to, be a complete piece of shit or a great person or whoever they may become. And everybody is unique. Of course, we have more than enough to judge each other on without having to resort to race or to sexism. But here we are. We're living in this PC culture where people don't know what they can and can't say. And I have a major ambivalence about this issue, about all these issues. And that refers to whether or not I should even be involved in it, whether or not I even care. And I've gone back and forth. It must drive my wife insane because one week I'm like, yeah, we've got to fix politics, and the next week I'm like, I'm never voting again. And, going back and forth on these issues. And sometimes I ask myself exactly who is in charge, Is it the people? Is it the government? Is it the corporations? And of course I know the answers to these questions. I've read enough about the economy and capitalism to understand that money talks. And that he who holds the money has, money equals speech. Not just power, but speech. And with citizens, united, able to basically make corporations people, and they can give as much money as they want to, as private donors to anybody who's running for office now. And then on top of it all, let's just say we get somebody in there who cares about the people. Many politicians and people in Congress spend 50 to 70% of their time on the phone and trying to raise funds and having fundraisers to try to keep their campaign going or to be able to pay for a campaign. That's a broken system. When the people that we hire that are put in charge are wasting their time just trying to stay in there, we have a problem. And it's been this way for a long time. So one of the things you might notice about politicians is they generally say nothing. And that includes the current president as well. They might make a big bold statements about the things that they want to change, but when they're asked about specific things, they tend to kind of give the runaround. Nixon was the worst at this. He did the exact same types of things. There's a direct, correlation and parallel between the current president and Nixon in the way that they treated the media, the way that they treat the people. And I'm definitely not turning this into a political video, so don't get all butthurt because you're a Trump supporter. That's one of the biggest problems we have. Is you can't even talk bad about a president without being attacked and saying, oh, you must be some kind of Hillary supporter. Oh, well, look, your president, Obama, failed. And I can say, you know what? You're right, he did. I voted for Obama. And, he tried a lot. He tried to do a lot of good, but he also failed in a lot of ways. And so goes, politics, right? I don't favor one side or the other. But trying to remain in the middle, remain neutral, is a daunting task. I hear a lot of these bullshit thrown around about America. What's the American dream? And I ask, what is the American dream? If the American dream is dead, then can somebody tell me exactly what it is? Because to me, the idea of safety and security, being able to prosper at my own effort, is pretty much what I consider to be the ideal American dream, if there is one. And a lot of people would just look at that and say, oh, well, that's just white privilege, and that's a totally separate issue that I'd like to talk about later. The idea that, everybody who has one privilege might be lacking in another privilege. In other words, there are plenty of people with black privilege that were born rich, but maybe they're black, and I'm born poor, but I'm white. They're different privileges. And the idea that we're tearing ourselves apart not through actual racism, but being overly sensitive about these topics. And I'm bringing that in now because it's an issue that's of divisiveness, that's a topic that's been utilized by, those in charge to keep the people fighting amongst themselves for a long time. Talking about, many different groups that form around these ideas that we need to protect these people or we need to stop these people. And meanwhile, we all know what happens when you try to resist a group or a way of thinking. What happens when somebody tells you you shouldn't think the way you think and that you're wrong? You dig in your heels. You dig in hard and you stand behind what you believe. And nobody's going to convince you otherwise by passing laws or telling you what you can and can't say. And knowing human nature, knowing this about humans, I think can give us a better perspective on how to handle these issues. What is the right way to handle these problems? What is the proper way? There are a lot of folks out there who will tell you they have the right ways. There's a lot of groupthink going on, and a lot of folks quoting the same old news articles and the same old BS that they hear on the TV. And speaking of TV, it's funny because I despise the media, and once in a while I might read the headlines, but I generally don't even go to any websites. I don't watch television. I mentioned that I had a TV the other day, and somebody said, "Oh, it's the television programming, why do you have a TV?" And my response was basically that I should have just used the proper term today, which is monitor. It's no longer a television, it's a monitor. And that's what a lot of people use in their houses. The fact that people still watch mainstream media and actually watch these news channels interspersed with these garbage commercials, to me is amazing that people are actually still allowing that to happen. But I can understand it. It gives people comfort to have the TV on in the background and hearing these drug commercials and all the side effects, and all the problems in the world and everything that's wrong with everything. But I don't watch television. I watch Netflix sometimes, or I might watch Hulu at night, watch Family Guy or something. But I don't watch media, and I don't watch television, so to speak, and I definitely don't watch mainstream media because all it does is gets people riled up. And I'm utterly ashamed. I don't believe the whole fake news bullshit. The news isn't fake. The news is just elaborated on and blown out of proportion. And yeah, some of the stories are lies. But like I've said before, and I'm only going to mention this once, but the media really is the only thing that stands between the people, between the tyranny of a dictatorship and keeping a democratic republic functioning, which is what we're supposedly living in. But when I look around myself and I see all these people who are these famous, not just politicians, but let's just go to the ones who are supposed to be responsible in media, the journalists, which used to be journalists. And think about some of these people. My question is, where are all the stoics? Where are all the calm and collected speakers who can hold themselves together in a discussion and have a rational discussion without getting all butthurt and upset? I try to even give the other side a point of view. In other words, I listen to the people who I disagree with. A good example would be Ben Shapiro. I can't stand the guy. He's just a little whiny college-looking kid. I just can't stand him. But I listen to him because I understand some of his points are coming from a point of view that I don't understand and I want to understand, and I can actually agree with a lot of what he says about the extreme left. That said, he actually got interviewed by someone on BBC the other day and just got owned by the dude, because he basically just took his microphone off and gave up on the discussion because the guy was asking him, as the devil's advocate, well, why do you say these things and what would you say about this? And he accused the guy of being some hardcore liberal, but the guy that was actually interviewing him was like a major conservative, so he just kind of laughed at him. And watching people get owned only happens when they're actually being interviewed and asked questions about their opinions. In other words, when some of these newscasters are on their own shows and they can do it their own way, they can cut and edit it the way they want to, then they appear to look like they know what they're talking about. I'm talking about people like Bill O'Reilly, Ann Coulter, Sean Hannity, or Alex Jones. And let me just say, I'm not just talking about just these right-wing people. Cenk Uygur, if that's how it's pronounced, and Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks, just as disgusting from the other side. Ranting and raving and getting all upset and groveling about this and that is not stoic, it's not responsible, and it's not productive. And that's just my opinion. And even some of the YouTubers, like Stephen Molyneux, whatever. Maybe you know him, maybe you don't, but I actually watched a video earlier about a guy who was talking about how he used to like the guy, and then he started going to these extremes, talking about, racial differences, and it seemed that the discussion went into division tactics to push people apart, to give people an excuse to feel the way that they feel, rather than give them information that's valid. In other words, we're looking for scientific evidence to prove the things that we want to believe, but ignoring everything which doesn't agree with us. And that's pretty common with humans. So anyhow, Rush Limbaugh, guys like that. A good example would be, like I said, Ann Coulter, for example. I saw an interview with her a while ago where she was talking about somebody was interviewing, asking her opinions on pot, and she was saying how, all pot smokers are just, just a drain on the system, that none of them have any productive jobs or do anything with their lives. And, she said, none of my friends smoke pot, but then the very next sentence, she was like, he's like, well, how do you know? And she's like, a bunch of my friends smoke pot. And in other words, when a person's actually questioned, you realize that a lot of these folks, they don't really know what they're saying. They don't really stand behind what they're saying. They're bullshitting you because it makes money. And if that doesn't make you angry, if you watch people like that and actually listen to them, and you find that out and that doesn't upset you or bother you, and you're willing to look past that and say, it's just entertainment, hey, I would say I commend you, but I think you're an idiot. That's how I feel. In other words, if you're listening to people like Bill O'Reilly, and you're well aware that he's putting on a show, and all you're doing is getting your emotions fueled and fed by the bullshit that he's spewing out of his mouth. So, we tend to see the stories, we see the patterns in the stories that we want to see, which fits what we want to believe. When we see things that we want to see, especially, say, with the visual system, it's called pareidolia. There's also one called apophenia. And both of these, one has to do with seeing faces, and one has to do with seeing patterns that may or may not exist. And this is how people get into these crazy conspiracy theories, where you may see something that is or isn't there, whether it be in your head, in your visual field, hearing things, whatever it might be. People in general are very prone to this. So, we create a lot of realities that don't really exist. And when people have, in other words, we all see faces and things. So if somebody shows you a picture and says, look, can you see this face, the face in this? You're going to say, yeah. And there have been many tests done on things, like this with people. You show them a random blob, and, where's the face? And they'll see a completely different face than you do. It's like when somebody points at the cloud, and they're like, oh, you see that face? Yeah. You never actually confirm you're on the same page. You just go along with it. And this is what we're doing politically, and with our hearts and minds, and to each other. We're just saying, yeah, fuck the other side. And meanwhile, we don't even know what we're talking about. We don't even know if we're on the same page at all, really. And people are afraid to speak their true feelings because they don't want to be ridiculed by their group. And that's what I mean about being stoic, being a man of his, an island, and not just a man. Don't get all butthurt on that. Man, woman, child, creature, rock, whatever you want to be. So, fighting ignorance is like quicksand. In other words, when these people that I constantly see being interviewed or, on the media, I think, when you see them arguing with people, it's really arguing with, it's like quicksand. You're consistently just digging in deeper, and they make other people look dumber and dumber and dumber. So you can point the finger and say, yeah, look at you, you snowflake, or, oh, you stupid conservatives, you guys don't know nothing. In the meantime, the rest of the world goes on. I watched a very moving video this morning from a movie maker who, I can't remember his name right now. He has a YouTube channel, and he uploaded a video, which was an astronaut's poem. I don't recall if it was today that it was uploaded, but it was a poem from an astronaut that had returned, and it was quite a long read. And I was just at tears in the end. I mean, I was crying pretty much through the whole thing. He was talking about how, there's a point when you leave the ship and you're out there floating in space and you look down and you float over your Houston, over your homeland, and then you realize the whole thing is your homeland. I'm not going to go through it all. I'll try to find the link and post it in the description. It was really good. It's the feeling that most astronauts say that they've had when they realize that we're really all just one big family. And I'll tell you, it's very similar, it sounds, to the mystical experiences people have, or the experiences I've had on psychedelics, especially very large doses. And that may sound ridiculous to people who don't understand it, but there have been periods where I've had these mystical awarenesses that went on for several hours, and I just sat and processed the existence of all of us and what it means to be alive, and just seeing that borders don't exist, understanding that we really are all the same organism, but we're individuals within that, and that we have to treat each other with respect because we live on such a small speck. But we blow up through the media about all this bullshit that doesn't matter, and so many people buy into it. It's so hard to get away from it. The controversy, the excitement, it taps into a primal part of us. So I thought that maybe knowledge would be enough. And I was the fool. I thought that perhaps we would reach a point where, hey, the internet's here. People can access information now. And let me give you an example like Wikipedia, for example. The minute I say that, a lot of people probably cringed instantly, because so many people just talk shit about Wikipedia. Even though a majority of it's probably pretty close to the truth, and closer to the truth than you're going to get from some random website where somebody's trying to get your money. I'm not saying that they're all correct or even close to it. I'm just saying that the people's aversion to it shows that some people don't like the simplicity of being able to find answers. And I know that may sound ridiculous to some people, but that's the way I see it. I think that people don't like, and this is the exact same reason why so many religious people have gone against science and actually almost fight against science, marching against science as a whole, arguing against science as a whole. Not any specific scientific study, or the idea that science is really a method and not a group. But sure, there's biased scientists. There are biased groups who have scientific studies that are done for corporations that are in their favor. The pharmaceutical industry is loaded with bullshit biased scientific studies. But each one of us can be a scientist. If you want to know if something works or not, you can go perform an experiment in your backyard. If it works, well, try that shit again. If it works again, hey, try it again. If it works again, hey, you might have something there. It might actually be a process. Some of these chemical processes can be seen and understood. So what I'm getting at is science has become the enemy, not because of really what it's produced, but because of what it's lacked in proving to us, convincing ourselves of what we want to believe. It's kind of like Prager University, one of the most ridiculous YouTube channels ever to just pop up and all of a sudden come up with these videos appearing to be true university educational videos. And one of them was talking about the existence. Does God exist? Or what is science? How does science, can it prove God? And it was this guy going on about how, the chances of the universe existing compared to never existing. And you get into the quintillion, quadrillions, 5 to the 50 millionth power. None of that means anything to anybody, not even mathematicians. I've heard from some of the top mathematicians, they say anybody who thinks they can fathom a number like that is just delusional. The best we can do is compare it, like we do with stars, to grains of sand on Earth, and still we can't even comprehend how many grains of sand are on Earth. But what does it mean to try to prove God exists through saying, well, the chances of us existing as we do today are 1 in whatever? And my question to anybody who thinks that way would be, what are you comparing the odds to? And they might say, well, nothing existing at all. I would say, well, how do you know that that is the other option or the default? How do we know the Big Bang is even correct? Or how do you know your chances are correct? But the big question and the main point I'm making, it doesn't prove your religion is correct. It merely says that maybe the universe was created by a consciousness. That's it. For all we know, it could be the flying spaghetti monster. That's not an argument to prove Christianity. It's not an argument to prove Islam. It's not an argument to prove anything. And none of that will be satisfactory until people can prove what they believe is true. This is where politics and religion both get people into trouble. In fact, it was my mom that taught me when I was younger, I think, or maybe heard around, when I was a teenager. The two things you don't talk about in the workplace are politics and religion. And I've always, maybe I got myself fired a couple times because one time I didn't get rehired because I was a little liberal in my views and my boss was an extreme conservative. And over the years, I've stuck leaning towards the left. I'm a liberal-minded person. Maybe I'm not going to try to define it as classic or modern liberal. I'm not even liberal. I'm just a person who believes in equality and fairness. You could even call me a little bit right, a little bit left, a little bit libertarian too. I would love to believe that you can eliminate government and that everybody will just do as, fine and treat each other with respect. In smaller tribes, that might work. But unfortunately, when there's nobody that has to pay the piper, when there's nobody that has to answer to the actual shareholder or the taxpayer, and that's what we have today, then we're kind of screwed. In other words, in the old days, if your leader made a bad decision, you could go knock on his door. Or his hut door, whatever it might be. Today, we don't have that option. You write letters, they get unread, they never get read, they get thrown in these, folders, files, deleted. People feel like they have no voice, and therefore people get more and more angry. And so, like I said, knowledge isn't enough. So I kind of got off subject there, but the idea that we can look things up and understand them doesn't help. It doesn't help us as a whole, because there are still people who don't want to believe the things that they read. So what do we do? What is the next best thing, and why are so many people so angry and upset? And you're going to think this is cheesy as hell, but stand by your empathy. We need more love. I've heard this a million times. The real enemies out there are always pointing the finger at one another. They're always looking to blame somebody else for their problems. But when you trace it down, a lot of these people just don't have the right love or connections in their lives. Or perhaps they didn't have it as a child. And sometimes when this argument comes up, people will say, well, no, this person's happily married, they have kids. You don't know if they're happily married. You don't know if that's where they want to be. No happily married person who has true love in their life I've ever seen goes out and seeks to argue with others for the sake of just, riling them up. I mean, when you know how it feels to be loved and you know how it feels to be respected, you want to give that to others. And I'm a very empathetic person. I care a lot. But I also have a side of me that says, fuck you. And if you cross me, I ain't going to put up with your shit. And that's okay. That's what I'm trying to convey, that it's okay to be strong and still to have an empathetic side, to have an understanding side. But pointing fingers at other people does nothing. And one of the worst things we have is dishonesty. And like I said, with all the people that I listed, there's dishonesty in all of that journalism. There's dishonesty in politics. People are blatantly lying to you. Instead of just saying the key words, which you never fucking hear, I don't know. How often do you hear that? How often do you hear a journalist or a politician or anyone who's in an argument say that? Say, well, I'm just not sure about that. No. They'll even Google 10 pages of garbage and post links about things they never even read or understand before that they will admit that they're wrong. And that took me time too, because I've always been that way. I like to be right. Everybody likes to be right, not for the sake of being right, but for the sake of not feeling like a fool. And once I learned that it's okay to be wrong, and then I started even expanding on that and saying I'd like to be wrong. Because if something I feel strongly about, and I talk about, and I'm wrong about it, I like to hear the other side. I may not always want to hear it. And sometimes I'll argue back for the sake of argument, just to get deeper into it. But like my friends know, and my family, I tend to play the devil's advocate in the sense that I will argue against something I believe. When somebody else is saying something that I agree with, maybe argue against it just to hear the argument, put it in my face so I can better understand it. So, as far as us, I don't know if humans have any real future as a species, beyond destroying ourselves. I go back and forth on that. I don't see a utopia, but I can see us blowing ourselves up. And the thing is, we cannot force change on people. And I think that's the biggest message that I'm trying to convey here, is that you cannot pass laws in order to create social norms. Some of the laws that already exist about not killing people, not stealing, these aren't followed just because they're laws. They're followed because we as humans have agreed that those are things that we think are right or wrong. And that's like many Christians think that they have exclusivity to morality. And I've heard people argue that, well, if you're atheist, you must have no morals. Where on earth would you get your morals? And I would say, well, where do you think the people got the morals when they wrote them down? Or the Ten Commandments or anything, thereof. It's all the same. Something we feel in our heart. When you harm others, you get harmed. It's just, it may not be, it's common sense now. So, I guess being a citizen means realizing it's okay to change. And what being a citizen is changing today. We often fall back on this thing about our forefathers and what they would have thought, what they would have done. Maybe we live in a different time now, but I won't get into that. If you want to improve other people's lives, you have to lead by example. And when the people that we appreciate, our heroes, whether they be politicians, musicians, actors, actresses, a whole variety of people who we look up to, if they're not living in standards and values that we respect, then often we will just say, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this person knows what's best, better than I do. And if their views are negative and harmful to others, then we might take on those views. So that's why it's important to be strong, as individuals. So, in other words, there's a common thread that we're looking for, and that's love. And if we can't get it, then we hate instead. Regardless of whether you believe that or not, that's at least my opinion. That's how I feel. That it seems that all the people that I've seen are the most hateful. When you really trace it down and ask them if, look at their history and ask them about it, find out that they've had problems. They have trust issues. They don't like people because of what's happened to them. Because I want people to love each other. It's not about being right. It's about all of us being right. Because we owe it to each other. Life is too short to fight. If we just observe people for a while, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about the way people behave. You learn a lot about the way you behave, if you're honest. And I'll tell you, my years on YouTube have taught me a lot about people. Things that I never realized that I could ever figure out. You can even go to your analytics and say, okay, which videos do people like? Which ones don't they like? Which, subjects are people really interested in, and for what reasons? And what things upset people? And, I try to avoid things that upset people. I try to pose things in a view that's neutral, as to the extent I can, considering my own bias as a human being. Folks can't see themselves. You cannot see yourself. I cannot see myself. I've learned to place myself outside and look down, metaphorically in a way, as best I can, to observe my actions, to see myself from the outside. It's something I learned in my Eastern Buddhist kind of, when I was in that phase, to really watch yourself and observe your daily activities and it's kind of like what they do in AA even, where they take accountability, or take a list of things, that maybe things that people they've wronged. Well, the same thing happens in your mind each day. How did I conduct my day? How can I do better tomorrow? And was I honest in my dealings? Was I fair? And, all I can say is that we should choose happiness. And that may seem difficult at times, but I think we're the ones that make it difficult. You'll never be happy all the time. I have all kinds of ups and downs. Sometimes I wonder if I'm bipolar by tendency, but they're mild. These are the ups and downs we have each day. These are the ups and downs we have even a minute apart, or an hour apart, or a day apart. One day you might feel down, you might feel frustrated, That's not the time to go out and argue with people. Just take a chill pill and relax, and, when you're in a better state of mind, then have a clear-headed discussion. And that's what I think it means to be stoic, if you will. To be calm, cool, and collected. And I do my best to be that kind of person, for what it's worth. I feel like it's a burden sometimes to try to think rationally. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be extremely left or right-leaning and just be able to make videos ranting about how the Jews are destroying the world, or the Mexicans are killing America, or be on the other side and say, oh, everybody on the right is an alt-right, or you're all racists, instigating all this excitement. But really it's just instigating hatred and anger, regardless of what side you're fighting from. So, after all the videos I've made like this, videos like this are often the least watched out of all my videos, because people don't want to talk about regular rationality. And I'm not saying just my videos, but videos in general on YouTube. You know, the ones where people are just trying to rationally figure things out. It's not going to be as popular as a video, obviously, where you're fighting the power, if you will. So, but fighting the power means fighting yourself sometimes. So, learning the difference is key. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all of you. I'll be uploading this, and maybe I'll use my new video editing software. I'm not sure yet if I can figure out how to use it right. So please leave a comment, and if you made it this far and you're not already subscribed, hit the subscribe button. And thanks to all my Patreon patrons. You know, for just $1 a month, it helps me to keep my channel afloat. If all my patrons gave $1 a month, or if all my subscribers did, I could actually do this for a living. So just a thought I'd throw out there. It does take a little effort, but I'll still do it for free because I love it. Take care, everybody, and take care of one another. Take care of your family and your friends, and try to take care of your enemies too. Be well.